Everyone on Flight 614 was calm. Reading. Watching screens. Nobody looked twice at the quiet woman in seat 1A. Then, somewhere over New York, both engines went silent. The tower said landing was impossible. The captain had no options. But the woman in 1A put down her coffee and said 2 words. Call sign Ghost. Her name was Colonel Diana Reeves. She was 44 years old. She was wearing a plain white shirt and dark pants. She had a small bag under her seat and a cup of coffee in her hand. She looked like a tired businesswoman going home after a long week. Nobody looked at her twice. Nobody knew she had spent 18 years as a military pilot. Nobody knew she had flown F-16 fighter jets in combat. Nobody knew her call sign was Ghost, given to her because she could appear and disappear in the sky faster than radar could track. Nobody knew any of that. She was just a quiet woman in seat 1A, drinking her coffee. The flight took off normally. The sky over Boston was clear. Captain David Park and First Officer Amy Chen were relaxed in the cockpit. The aircraft climbed smoothly toward its cruising altitude of 28,000 feet. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. Then, 22 minutes after takeoff, both engines went quiet. Not one engine. Both. Captain Park felt it first. A strange silence where there should have been a steady roar. He looked at his instruments and felt his heart stop. Both engine gauges were dropping. The aircraft was still flying, carried by its speed and altitude, but the engines were not producing power. He checked again. He tried the restart procedure. Nothing happened. Tower, this is United 614, he said into the radio, his voice tight. We have lost both engines. Both. Repeat, both engines are out. We are at 26,000 feet over Connecticut airspace, descending. Requesting emergency clearance. The tower controller's voice came back sharp and fast. United 614, confirm both engines lost. That is not possible on a 737. Confirm your situation. Both engines out. Confirmed. We have approximately 9 minutes of glide time before we lose controllable altitude. We are over populated area. We cannot find a clear field. We need options. The tower went silent for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a very long time when a plane is falling. In the cabin, passengers had felt the change. The steady engine hum they never thought about was gone. The silence was strange and wrong. People looked up from their screens. A baby started crying in row 12. A man in row 8 grabbed his wife's hand. The lead flight attendant, Marcus, made a quick decision. He walked calmly to the front of the cabin and spoke in a low, controlled voice to the woman in 1A. Ma'am, I have to ask you something and I need an honest answer. Are you a pilot? Diana Reeves looked at him. She had already felt the engine silence. She had already been calculating glide ratios, wind direction, and the geography below them. She had been doing it automatically, the way she always did, because 18 years of flying never fully left your brain. Yes, she said. Military? Yes. What did you fly? F-16s. 18 years. Call sign Ghost. Marcus looked at her for 1 second. Then he said, please come with me. She was already standing. When she walked into the cockpit, Captain Park turned around and saw a woman he did not recognize. He was about to say something, but Diana spoke first. I'm Colonel Diana Reeves, retired Air Force, 18 years F-16 combat pilot. Call sign Ghost. Tell me your fuel state, your current altitude, your glide speed, and your wind reading. Captain Park blinked once. Then his training took over. Altitude 21,000 and descending. Glide speed 220 knots. Wind from the southwest at 14 knots. Fuel shows residual only. Engine restart has failed 3 attempts. Diana looked at the navigation screen. The aircraft was over northern New Jersey, descending steadily. Below them was one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Manhattan was 40 miles ahead. She could see the map. She could see the geometry. She ran the numbers in her head in 4 seconds. You cannot reach JFK, she said. You cannot reach Newark. You are going to run out of altitude before you reach either runway. She pointed at the screen. Teterboro Airport. 19 miles northwest. Small airport. Short runway. But the numbers work if we start the turn now. Tower said impossible, First Officer Chen said quietly. They said we should prepare for water landing in the Hudson. Tower is calculating for a commercial pilot, Diana said. I am calculating for a combat approach. There is a difference. The runway at Teterboro is 7,000 feet. We have enough glide. We need to start the turn in the next 45 seconds or the window closes. Captain Park looked at her. He had never met this woman in his life. She had walked into his cockpit 90 seconds ago. But he had spent 30 years reading people in high-pressure situations, and what he saw in her eyes was not panic, not confidence for show, not hope. What he saw was a person who had already solved the problem and was waiting for him to catch up. Take the controls, he said. Diana sat in the right seat. Her hands went to the yoke. She keyed the radio herself. Tower, this is United 614. Pilot in command is Colonel Diana Reeves, USAF retired, call sign Ghost. We are not landing in the Hudson. We are executing a dead stick approach to Teterboro runway 01. Clear the airspace and get your emergency teams to that field now. There was a pause from the tower. Then a different voice, a senior controller, came on. United 614, Teterboro runway 01 is active with traffic. We cannot clear it, Diana said. Her voice was flat and final. You have 40 seconds. She did not wait for a reply. She began the turn. A Boeing 737 with no engine power and 140 people on board is not supposed to be manageable like a fighter jet. It is heavy. It responds slowly. It wants to descend faster than it should. But Diana had practiced dead stick landings in military aircraft for years. She had studied glide ratios the way other people studied music. Her hands were not thinking. They were just flying. She kept the nose at the exact angle that gave maximum glide distance. She used the wind. She talked to Captain Park in short, clear sentences, telling him what she was doing and why, keeping him in the loop because it was his aircraft and because 2 sets of eyes were better than 1. The passengers could feel the long banking turn. They could feel the silence of the engines. Some were crying. Some were praying. A man in row 4 was holding his phone, looking at a photo of his children. He did not put the phone away. He just held it and looked at it. At 8,000 feet, Diana could see Teterboro below her. A small airfield in the flat land of New Jersey. She could see the runway. She could see the emergency vehicles already moving into position, red and white lights flashing in the afternoon sun. Someone in that tower had believed her. Gear down, she said. Captain Park reached over and lowered the landing gear. The aircraft shuddered slightly as the wheels came out. Flaps 30, she said. First Officer Chen moved the flap lever. The airspeed was dropping. The ground was rising. Diana held the glide angle with the precision of someone who had done this in simulation hundreds of times and in reality more times than she liked to remember. She had landed damaged aircraft on short runways with smoke in the cockpit and warning lights everywhere. This was not that. This was simpler than that. At 500 feet, the runway was straight ahead. At 200 feet, Diana began the flare. She pulled back on the yoke, raising the nose gently, slowing the rate of descent. The aircraft floated for 2 seconds. Then the main wheels touched the runway with a firm, solid thump. She pressed the brakes hard. Without engine reverse thrust, stopping the aircraft required everything the brakes had. The runway disappeared beneath them at high speed. The emergency vehicles were running alongside the runway, keeping pace. The end of the runway was getting close. The aircraft stopped with 400 feet of runway remaining. For a moment, nobody in the cabin made any sound. Then the crying started. Not frightened crying. Something different. Relief that was too big to hold inside. Captain Park sat in his seat with both hands flat on his legs. He turned and looked at Diana. He could not find any words. He just looked at her. Diana set the parking brake, took her hands off the controls, and exhaled slowly through her nose. She looked out the window at the emergency vehicles surrounding the aircraft. She looked at the runway behind them. She thought of nothing in particular for about 4 seconds. Then she turned to Captain Park and said, "You should get on the PA and talk to your passengers. They need to hear your voice right now." He nodded and picked up the intercom. Diana stood up and walked back into the cabin. She did not make an announcement. She did not raise her hands for applause. She just walked back to seat 1A, sat down, and picked up her coffee cup. It was cold now. Around her, passengers were crying and hugging each other and calling people on their phones. A young woman across the aisle looked at her with wide eyes and said, "Was that you? Were you flying the plane?" Diana looked at her. "The captain landed the plane," she said. "I just helped with the navigation." The young woman stared at her for a moment, clearly aware that was not the full truth. But Diana had already turned to look out the window, watching the emergency crews work efficiently around the aircraft, and her expression was calm and quiet, like someone who had finished a task and was already thinking about something else entirely. Outside, the investigators would later find the cause, a rare dual fuel valve failure, triggered by a manufacturing defect. The aviation world would call the landing a miracle. The FAA report would use the word extraordinary. Pilots who read the case study in training programs would talk about the Teterboro glide for years. But in seat 1A, Colonel Diana Reeves, call sign Ghost, ordered another coffee from a flight attendant who was still shaking, looked out at the flat New Jersey sky, and said nothing more.